Hey guys, it's VT, and it's finally time to review Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler is a very defensive hero, very interesting hero, and the hero of the X-Men that I was most anticipating, when X-Men were announced for Marvel Champions. I was so excited, and unfortunately, in some ways, this is a review I didn't really want to make, but you'll see what I mean by that as we go through the video. So Nightcrawler is very defensive. He's got this free defense stat, his biggest stat, but due to his Bamf mechanic, which we'll look at in a second, he can basically defend without exhausting, a little bit like Quicksilver or Ghost Spider, which is very, very fun. And then he has 2 thwarting. So if you defend without exhausting, you are ready to then thwart, which in solo play is particularly good. And again, double defense in multiplayer is really, really useful. So this is all a good start in terms of his hero form stats. But then he has 1 attack. And I like plenty of characters with 1 attack. But Nightcrawler's 1 attack hurts him severely. And this is because, to cut a long story short, I don't like his damage events. I think they could be among my least favorite damage events of all characters in the game, which is a little bit surprising. And you guys might be surprised to hear that as well. I don't know if that's actually true, but they're low down, put it that way, in my opinion. So it's just unfortunate the way that kind of has shaken out. But he has his rapid teleportation ability, which is an action. Spend 1 resource of any type, return a copy of Bamf from your discard pile to your hand. So this Bamf upgrade, which is what lets you defend without exhausting, 0 cost, slap it on the villain, is really, really easy to get every turn. However, if you're spending a resource to keep getting it back, you basically kind of go from a 5 hand size hero to a 4 hand size hero, and you kind of need like resource generators to kind of get out of that. The value of Bamf is good. It is typically worth it, but it just gives you, less to deal with what's on the board, even if it's helping you prepare to defend in the future. And Alter Ego, not much to say here. Free recovery, action, search for a copy of Bamf, add it to your hand. Well, that's really good. That will get the ball rolling. But it's very easy if you see like 2 of your Bamfs early. You'll just get 1 use out of this because you've got 3 copies of Bamf. And then all the Bamfs are gone from your deck, and this ability is offline. And Mutant Education wasn't quite the solution I was hoping it would be. More on that later. Long story short, the X-Men trait and a Mutant trait on both, Hero and Alter Ego, very useful. Typical hand size 5 and 6. Fine, hit points 9. A little bit dangerous considering his nemesis has quick strike, but his free defense, his ability to use Bamf, Nightcrawler is very, very tanky. Now, a small confession, I was actually sitting here in editor mode, and the Nightcrawler review I did originally, the first few minutes were corrupted. So we're about to switch back to the original recording, minus the haircut, and we'll resume from there. Nightcrawler also has a very low cost curve. This is taken from Marvel's CDB. 4 0 cost cards, 6 1 cost cards, and 5 2 cost cards. Not a single 3 or 4 cost card, and more 1 cost cards than anything else. However, 3 of those 4 0 cost cards are Bamfs, and you're going to be getting this out of your deck a bit, which means your average hand might have, maybe not so many 0 costs, and a lot of the 1 and 2 cost cards are going to end up either making you directly or indirectly discard a Bamf that you played, and that's kind of, going to have been in your hand. You might have had to buy it back with this hero ability, Rapid Teleportation. Long story short, basically some of them are going to be, 2 or 3 cost effectively, even if they, have 1 or 2 costs printed on them. And this kind of artificial increase in their cost kind of combos in a negative way with his need to kind of use that action to buy Bamf back. Now, obviously, once you're set up with anything like Death Focus, his tail upgrade, which generates a resource, not such a bad problem. But early game, especially, first deck pass can be pretty brutal for Nightcrawler on that front. He's a little bit held back. So to talk about his damage problem, problem is a strong word here, but some of the challenges it faces, we have to look at these cards. He has 2 copy of each, Port and Punch and Tally Ho. Port and Punch is what we'll focus on first. 2 cost event, attack and superpower traits, so pretty good traits here. And it says attack, deal 3 damage to an enemy, deal 3 damage to each enemy with Bamf attached. And the hidden downside here, as you'll know if you watched my preview video a few months ago, if you, put Bamf on a minion, you get to deal 3 damage twice to that minion. It's going to take out most minions in the game, which is really good. But Bamf will be discarded because the minion is defeated. So the minion goes away. Where does Bamf go? Straight to your discard pile, which is kind of artificially increasing the cost of this because, you had to put Bamf there and now it's gone. You've lost an extra card in addition to its 2 cost. So it turns out being, to take out minions, if you want to focus all the damage on minions, it kind of ends up having, a free cost, 4 effective resources for the 6 damage, which isn't super good. It's fine. But the other problem is, if this is your only copy of Bamf, now you don't have, Bamf ready for any of the other things which interact with it, or just to put on the villain. So if you have a bunch of minions out and you happen to have a bunch of Bamfs in your hand along with this card, you have lucked out. But you need to, get the right amount of minions, get the right amount of Bamfs, and actually get this card in the same hand, which doesn't really line up very often in my experience. Sometimes you will get 9 damage out of it rather than 6. That does make it pretty good, but there's also so many times where I just see this and I'm just like, I don't want to play it. And I think we can compare this to a couple of other cards. We've got Ice Blast from Iceman. Now, Ice Blast does cost 1 more, but you don't need to put Bamf anywhere. You don't need to put Frostbites anywhere to enable it. It kind of puts them where you need, and you can combo, other players with minions out by putting Frostbites there and other ways first. Long story short, though, Ice Blast is a lot more convenient and generally does just as much, if not more, on the board. Important Punch, if you put Bamf on the villain and damage just the villain, it's 6 damage for a pretty effective cost. It's pretty reasonable, kind of efficient, but I don't know if I really want to just have it be efficient when I'm hitting the villain. Good cards that only damage the villain don't tend to get put in a lot of decks for a reason. It's just, board control is so important, and that's where Important Punch falls slightly short in comparison to Ice Blast. But we can look at Dance of Death. Just using this for board control, putting Bamf on a minion's probably going to get, defeated, losing Bamf, extra cost. It's basically the same cost as Dance of Death, but rather than do 3 and 3, you get 1, 2, and 3, which just makes it more flexible. And if you watch my Every Hero's Worst Card series with Boom Guy, and the actual point of that is to say nice things just about the less liked cards in people's kits, you can look at the comments on the episode with Black Widow, and some people say Dance of Death is her worst card. I think it's better than Important Punch, and this is, Wave 1 compared to Wave 8, which we're in now, kind of at the tail end of it. So, just interesting food for thought. I've seen Important Punch, I think, on my Discord server, I forget who said it, compared to Shield Toss, and I see the comparison, but you'll get 4 damage on each enemy rather than 3 damage on each. The advantage of Important Punch is you can put the 3 damage and then the extra 3 damage on the same target, whereas Shield Toss has to be different targets. But Shield Toss, I don't know, it's just easier, I find, and if you want to hit more than 2 targets, it starts to become much more efficient. It's going to be 1 card for each HS target. 1 card for 4 damage at that point is a very nice exchange rate, which kind of offsets some of the maybe slight inefficiency of lower target counts, whereas Important Punch, it's just a lot harder to make anything like that happen. The last comparison I'm just going to make here is Melee. It does 3 damage to one enemy, 3 damage to another enemy. Again, you can't put it on the same enemy, but it is very similar to Important Punch, and outside of Hone Technique, I don't think Melee is really a very popular card at all. So, Important Punch, better than Melee, definitely, but it's not a million miles away, which is kind of the point I'm trying to make here. It's not the ideal solution to most of the damage-oriented problems I face in most of my games, has been my experience. Then we have Tally Ho. So 1 cost defense event, and what's really interesting is it doesn't really need to be a defense event. You can only use it after Bamf makes you the defender, so, having a defense trait, it's really only enabling Nerves of Steel to pay for it, but you're already defending stuff. It doesn't make you defend anything extra in any way, which is pretty funny. What it does is it returns Bamf to your hand instead of discarding it, which is useful, and it deals 3 damage to the attacking enemy, which is pretty good. Generally, this is hitting the villain, though, which, villain lock damage, you're starting to see sort of a slight pattern here. It's not so good, but it's still, pretty efficient, especially if you have nothing else to spend, X-Gene or your tail resource generator on. We'll see that in a second. So it can be, just really efficient 3 damage. So Tally Ho, getting Bamf back to your hand is really good. Your other events which want to combo with it, discard it, use it, put it in a certain place, they're going to love that because you can use Rapid Teleportation to get another Bamf if you've got one in your discard pile at least, which is another small obstacle. You might only have one that you found so far, but regardless, generally you can use Tally Ho, get a Bamf, use your hero ability, get another Bamf, and it will combo with your other events in hand. But you have to have Tally Ho and that event in the same hand, and it has to be an event you actually want to play for the situation at hand. So you have to make a lot of things line up for that to really do a lot of work here. And since, it's a defense card, but it actually doesn't make me defend any more than just using Bamf itself would, it doesn't really have any defensive benefit. When I see this card in my hand, and then Important Punch in my hand, and maybe a resource card, and maybe an upgrade, I'm like, what do I do this turn? Nothing is going to be very impactful. Yeah, okay, I could maybe do 6 damage with Important Punch, but it won't have been very efficient, and it's probably not leaving me many resources other ways to do anything else, especially if I've had to, buy Bamf back into my hand with Rapid Teleportation. I might just have like 1 card left, maybe 2 cards left, and I've got to answer everything else that the game is asking me at that point, and it's a little bit tricky. One of his events I like a little bit more is Teleport Drop. It's a 2-cost event, attack, superpower, and you have to discard a copy of Bamf from the enemy, but you deal 8 damage, which is huge, and you stun the enemy. Steady and Stalwart enemies, okay, this kind of sucks. But on a normal enemy, this kind of replaces Bamf. Instead of, having that kind of, easy way to defend the attack, the enemy is now stunned, which means you don't even risk the boost card or any damage that overflows from your basic defense stat. And I like that a lot, but I don't always want to put the damage on the villain. Again, damage that is locked to the villain isn't so good. And if I don't put this on the villain, usually the stun is wasted. And that's kind of tricky. So using this against a minion, you can kind of add on the kind of loss of Bamf as kind of an extra cost. I would say it's maybe like a free cost card, maybe a swinging web kick, but if you use it on a minion. Not the worst, it is a good way to get rid of minions, but Spider-Man doing that isn't so bad because Spider-Man has tons and tons of money, which Nightcrawler doesn't have. It's good. I do like this card, but it is not a perfect tool for minion clearing, and it is certainly not, you don't play this for the stun, it's just a nice benefit to have from it. So, it's good. It does give good damage on the villain if you're trying to push toward the win condition, but anytime you're asked to do stuff on the board, anytime you're under pressure, it's not a good card, and that is where it falls a little bit short. Prehensile Tail is a really, really good card. 1-cost upgrade, generates a wild resource, excellent. It is locked to an event. That is the big downside of Prehensile Tail, and I do find that sometimes 2 turns have gone by and I just haven't used the tail because I've got some of the events we've looked at that aren't actually doing what I need. I maybe need to do other stuff. I'm trying to put all my resources into that. Up next, we have Port Away, and again, this is one of, it's a 0-cost card, but you have to discard a copy of Bamf from your hand. So in essence, it's a 1-cost card, and then you've lost a copy of Bamf that you could have used. So a little bit of a steep cost in some ways, but you get to change forms and ready. That is so flexible, really, really powerful. So I actually really like Port Away. So we've then got Curse Chapel, his support, and its alter ego Ernie benefits. He has really good defense already. +1 rec doesn't really feel very necessary for him. After you basic recover, you do get to draw a card or choose another player to draw a card in multiplayer. That is really, really good, but I don't think I've used this I think at the most 3 times in one game, but it's usually once or twice if I even play it. I think it's his lowest priority card. It's not bad, but for Nightcrawler, it's not really necessary, and I think that holds him back, holds this card back at least quite a lot. But this then brings us to a card that I basically only have positive things to talk about, and that is Kurt's Cutlasses. 2-cost upgrade, but I'm getting +1 attack, +1 defense, and retaliate. It's a little bit like combat training, armored vest, and dauntless. It costs you 7 effective resources to play those 3 cards together. I should explain effective resource is, let's say I've got combat training in my hand, I choose to play it, and then I need to find 2 other cards to, pay the resource cost. I've actually lost 3 cards from my hand, even though it says, 2 costs. So, 3 cards that were potentially resources for other stuff have now gone. Using that kind of maths, it's 7 effective resources to play combat training, armored vest, and dauntless. It's 3 effective resources to play Kurt's Cutlasses. So Kurt's Cutlasses are very good. Now, of course, if you exhaust to defend, you cannot exhaust to attack. So there's some kind of diminishing returns here, but thanks to Bamf, you can ready up. So it's very good, particularly for solo play, to be able to get that 4 defense. 4 defense in kit, by the way, is huge, and then be able to attack for 2. Very nice. In multiplayer, though, typically I'll defend for 4, and I might just want to defend for 4 again for somebody else. That is why even, let's say I'm playing aggression in 4-player, I'm going to have a 4 defense stat a lot of the time. It's going to be in my interest maybe to defend and then defend someone else, which can kind of make protection, on another player, maybe, I don't want to say redundant, but there's definitely some conflicting interest there if they want to try and defend a lot of people as well. So Nightcrawler always has a little bit of protection in him, but this card is very good, and Retaliate 1, pretty nice to have for Toughs on the villain, for a Change of Fortune, a new aspect card, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail later, but really, really good card. So these are Nightcrawler's cards in their entirety. I've taken this from Marvel CDB, and it's really interesting that as a low cost curve, event-driven character, his Prehensile Tail says, only pays for events. They're driving you to have and play events as Nightcrawler. He's a far cry from, let's say, I don't know, Gamora. Long story short, low cost curve characters typically get to do a lot very, easily for cheap, and can play a lot of cards, have a lot of, cheap cards. Well, this is not a Nightcrawler. I think if you want to eliminate the cards that are unreliable or low efficiency, we end up with things that can, immediately affect and impact the board. Kind of just these cards, in all honesty. Scared Ahead, which we'll look at in a second, and Daytripper. And Daytripper is an ally, actually, so, even will take, like, an extra turn to get the full value, typically. But the efficiency is there as an ally that I think it makes up for it. But, Port and Punch, Port Away, Tally Ho, Teleport Drop. These really aren't ideal solutions for dealing with minions and, board control in general, which I think hurts him quite a lot. It's not just the efficiency, but it's getting, the right amount of Bamf, so Bamf's in the right place, so at the right time, and, drawing these things when you need them on top of it, because events are inherently less reliant than allies and upgrades, which are just, on the board multiple turns, and that's fine, but it kind of feels like Nightcrawler needs to work a little bit harder to do a little bit less than most heroes can do, and that is a little bit of a shame, but readying with Bamf is really fun. Teleport drop is really satisfying, really fun. If you are free to just do villain damage, these cards are a lot better in that respect, but his damage isn't so high that I think, Rush is a typical strategy for him. So it's a little bit strange. And to kind of illustrate the kind of low impact problem he has, I'm going to compare him to Quicksilver, who's another character that can basically, defend but still actually be ready. And Quicksilver's weakness is generally said to be, he's a slow start. You have to set him up in that. But I think he has more high impact than Nightcrawler. Yes, his defense starts lower, but if we look at kind of his cards and stuff, I think, Scarlet Witch, yeah, okay, maybe she will only 4 or attack for 1, but she can attack for 4. Putting that aside, double time and maximum velocity, they help with both attacking and forwarding. Really impactful cards, even if you haven't got anything else set up, honestly. Whereas you just have Scout ahead on Nightcrawler, which is just forwarding, and that's his impactful card, and it's less flexible. So in a weird way, Quicksilver, and the whole meme is kind of, he's Quicksilver, but he's kind of slow to set up. I think he has more early game kind of impact and just tools that you're likely to draw into to solve problems than Nightcrawler. So it's not a perfect comparison, but hopefully the gist I'm trying to get at here is, fairly clear. So let's talk about the 2 cards that I actually like for him pretty significantly, both in general, but also, they have a higher impact. One is Scout Ahead, which costs 1, superpower and fort traits, hero action, remove free threat from a scheme. If the card stopped there, this would be great. A 1-cost card that removes free threat, really flexible, pretty nice ratio, perfect for player side schemes, even in higher player counts because they work in multiples of 3 quite often. That's just a nice card to have. And you can discard a copy of Bamf to remove free threat from another scheme. This is actually a pretty good use of Bamf, and apparently it's got pretty dark here, so let me go fix the lighting. Okay, I'm back, and I want to make a different kind of point here, because I feel like so far my review has been slightly negative oriented, There's just a little bit of awkwardness, a little bit of, inefficiency or unreliability as kind of a through line of some of his cards and, the way they kind of interact. But individually, his cards are pretty good. I made a very basic tier list here, and I didn't spend that long on it. Maybe 1 or 2 cards would, shift slightly. Port and Punch, I hear people really like this card. I just can't get it to do damage in the right places when I really need it to, which for me is a big kind of downside, and that hurts it. But generally though, this tier list is top heavy. B and up forms the vast majority of his cards. These cards individually are really, really good. The downside is the slight unreliability, the Bamf awkwardness, getting the right amount in the right place for all these cards. Normally I say, the sum of its parts is, greater than the whole, but here it's kind of, the sum of its parts is less than the whole. You put all these things together in one deck, and I'm just drawing hands pretty often across all these games I'm trying, where I feel like, oh, I've got all these cards, and, they're not bad, or, they're not terrible, or, sometimes they're quite good, but I can't deal with the problem in front of me that is, hurting me actively, and that is a kind of a big problem. If you've played Defense Protection and you felt like you can stop a lot of damage, but you can't really, make things happen, Nightcrawler kind of has that same problem baked in, and that is the big downside here. But the cards individually are quite good, and if you happen to get, a good hand, these cards can be quite desirable and a lot of fun. It's kind of an overall look for now. Low cost curve is good, even if it has some, secret extra costs here and there. Cards are, as we just looked at, mostly actually pretty good on an individual level. His defenses are amazing. They are really, really good. Definitely his biggest strength that he can basic defend, then basic defend another attack, especially with his Cutlasses. So I can't emphasize enough that it is really, really good. And hey, he's Nightcrawler. Super cool character. I really like him. So definitely a pro. Problem is, low impact cards, reliability issues, but also, as I mentioned earlier on, rapid teleportation. You have to spend a resource to get bounced back quite often, which kind of means you are a 4-hand size hero in terms of solving what's in front of you, even if you do have it a very efficient way to kind of handle the villain's attack in most cases. So it is definitely a factor, but another factor which I hinted at is his Nemesis minion. If you play with standard 3, this is going to hurt you in particular because it has a chance to come in as a boost effect, because Azazel here, hopefully I'm saying that right, he's got quick strike, so he'll enter play and attack you, but if he comes in to play as, from a boost effect on standard 3, he will basically attack you in the normal minion attack phase of the villain phase as well, and you will suffer. If he comes in just, from the encounter card phase, maybe Shadow of the Past, Standard 1, whatever, not so much of a problem, but still, free damage that you're not expecting on a 9 HP character baseline is a little bit dangerous, especially his boost effect when he comes back around. You'll be seeing him quite a bit. You defeat his player side scheme, you might be seeing him again. This guy is particularly persistent, which makes him a little bit dangerous. So in solo play, I can defend for free with Bamf. I'm still ready. When the player phase comes around, I can thwart for 2. The threat generally isn't a huge problem for Nightcrawler, especially, with the typical builds of his, which will have a lot of X-Men allies, and, it's pretty helpful to have allies with thwarting. Damage is going to be, maybe a little bit assisted by allies in solo play. We'll come into, deck builds a little bit more soon. But with his imperfect damage cards, I already feel like, he can struggle a bit there. But take it to multiplayer, where you typically specialize more, as in, let's say, aggression minion clearer. I think his own damage events hold him back a bit. That one attack starting with holds him back a bit. The fact that you need to pay the Bamf tax, rapid teleportation to get a Bamf back, just gives him less room to, pay for stuff to take out minions. You do not have to get Bamf back. You could focus all your hand on defeating minions, but then you're not doing any Nightcrawler stuff. You're missing out on all the benefits of Bamf. And at that point, if you're doing that, with any kind of frequency, you probably just shouldn't be playing Nightcrawler. Slightly similar thing with, threat removal in multiplayer. He can definitely do it, and I actually like that a bit more. But really, there is such a draw in multiplayer, at least 3 and 4 player, I would say, to play protection, that I think it's hard to play him in anything else there. Like, you can, but you're probably just doing it for the sake of variety on Nightcrawler, when there's a lot of other characters that could probably do it just as well without losing anything, in my opinion. Solo, I think you can be a bit more flexible with it. I think he does pretty well in all of the aspects there. And maybe actually, because he's got so much protection built into him, maybe don't go protection in solo play. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But what I'm really trying to get at throughout this video is that Nightcrawler has protection in his soul. So in the past, I've done a video on how to pair the aspects in multiplayer. And I say one of the easiest pairings is aggression and justice. But the easiest pairing for protection is protection and leadership. And I go on to have this little kind of, rough, graph demonstration, and it's just vague estimates. But long story short, you can expect protection to do at least 75% of, the damage mitigation, whereas leadership is probably doing over half of the damage and threat removal in general, while protection protects them. Protection, really good at not, stopping people getting defeated, but it's not so good at removing threat or dealing damage, while leadership being the all-rounder, and if it doesn't need to chump block with allies, it can just put all of that, ally usage into damage and threat removal. Hopefully you guys are with me here. So Nightcrawler is always a little bit of protection. So in multiplayer, I could be playing him in aggression, but I'm still probably going to be mitigating more damage for the group than you might expect for it. If I put him into leadership here, he would probably not be mitigating just 25% of the damage. He'd be mitigating a lot more, but probably dealing less damage than you would expect as well, just for a, base character in Marvel Champions. And I think that's important to remember. So let's say I'm playing Hawkeye, or Star-Lord, Rocket, characters that don't have such a good defense stat in 2-player. I can put them in maybe aggression, put Nightcrawler in justice, and his innate protectiveness will help defend them as well. Even though he's not in protection, it can work really, really well. So that's kind of a cool use for him, a kind of a niche where he can play a different aspect, but still help protect, someone else at the table very, very, very consistently. Taking this to solo play, I think is where it gets really interesting. So you can play him in protection, but whereas kind of your board management or, villain defeating capability coming from, really, you have to kind of build into it any aspects, in my opinion. And protection doesn't have a lot for that. So you'll see in a lot of these builds, I end up taking a lot of allies. And the way I kind of, visualize it is Nightcrawler, he himself, as, playing the hero, is kind of bringing protection. And then my deck, the allies in it, is kind of almost like a leadership player. So I'm using Nightcrawler to defend for my allies so they can get some of the job done. And it's kind of weird. There's kind of a disconnect there because of his, Prehensile tail. The tail is saying, oh, give Nightcrawler events. But the game is saying, you need to deal with this stuff consistently, and you're not going to get consistent hands. So you need to have something on the board to deal with stuff, which is going to be allies. So hopefully that makes sense. Long story short, in 2-player, consider him maybe 50% protection, and I think that will work out well for how you, pair him with other characters. And in solo play, just consider Nightcrawler, again, kind of a lot of protection baked in, and you're only going to find answers elsewhere, consistent answers, and that typically for me ended up being, allies. And I don't think allies is a negative, really. It's actually probably my favorite card type. But I think one of the benefits of having, good defense is that you don't need to chump block. It opens up other possibilities. But for me, Nightcrawler has really brought me back to just allies anyway for a different purpose. So yeah, I've got a little bit of mixed feelings about that. So I'm back after an 8-hour break. Hopefully I remember where we got to. I think, I teased a little bit about decks before and how I was doing certain things, but I want to get into specifics here. And a lot of what I've talked about here has been, oh, I don't like his damage stuff very much. I find it like a little bit hard to, make everything meet in a satisfying way. I think the phrase I used was, feels like I'm working, harder than the average hero to do a little bit less than the average hero. And one of the ways I thought to get around this, and this was actually the first real way I tried Nightcrawler, although trust me, I tried it several times since, I thought to make Bamf and all the things around it more reliable would take Mutant Education, which is a zero-cost event, which when Ultrigo lets you choose two identity-specific cards in your discard pile, shuffle them back into your deck. So you're going to get those more reliably, more often, and everything would work just fine, right? Well, here's the thing. If I'm often getting hands of cards with Nightcrawlers that, I don't think are that useful or that desirable, getting Mutant Education, which does nothing immediately for me, is just another kind of non-option on any given turn when I need immediacy, when I need something with impact. And I can have X-Mansion in play and it will replace itself. But if I flip down to Ultrigo, I'm probably still not getting anything too much that will let me impact the board a lot. And even on the way back down, X-Mansion is a slow, low-impact card. It doesn't do much. 1 extra health the turn you play it. If you go Ultrigo or, start Ultrigo, it's fine. It's a pretty good card. It's useful, but it's not really doing what Nightcrawler needs most of the time. Mutant Education, getting one of those in my hand, double resource, a couple of his events. I'm not that excited for it. I'm a little underwhelmed. So I tried this, several times, and I just kind of had to give up on it, which is a shame because, I was really looking forward to these kind of interesting Go Ultrigo Mutant Education builds. And yeah, didn't click for me. I know people have had success with this, but for me, just it's lacking the consistency that I think Nightcrawler is already lacking. Because sure, when I put stuff back into my deck, it's more consistent, but I have to get to that point when I'm already, feeling a little bit slower than Quicksilver, in all honesty, and that's a little bit tricky for me. And then when you shuffle the things back in your deck, you still might not get them, on the next turn or whatever, and it still might not add up. It's just imperfect, and that's fine. So I moved on from this. I'm going to quickly talk about Pool now, and long story short, I don't like Pool with Nightcrawler. I wouldn't spend your time on it. It can work fine, but it's not that interesting, not that special to me, and I think there are, dozens of other heroes which you'll get more out of going Pool in, and I think that's fine. First up, we really need to talk about protection in the aspects. Change of Fortune is a big new aspect card with Nightcrawler. It's a 1-cost upgrade, and if you defeat a minion during the villain phase, you can exhaust it and draw 2 cards. And I really like drawing 2 cards, and Nightcrawler's really good at triggering this with his Retaliate, and if you're running Jocasta, you can have Jocasta hold Tally-Ho, and then use that to take out a minion you've put Bamf onto, and it's beautiful. But here's the thing. Drawing 2 cards on Nightcrawler is typically worth less than drawing 2 cards on, in my opinion, most other heroes. I think he, sometimes by setting up a minion, getting it to the right health to defeat, or, having Jocasta hold the right card, all these things, if everything comes together, you get 2 cards, but they're not going to do a ton for Nightcrawler. I feel like I had to take 2 steps back to take 3 steps forwards, when I probably could have just taken 2 steps forwards. I probably just could have done something to make some immediate impact. I played this at different player counts, and I remember one 3-player game. We were playing at one of the board game cafes not too far away, and I was just taking forever on the villain phase because not only was I trying to block a couple of attacks with people, but I was trying to defeat a minion every time. And I had to have people oh, maybe leave that minion for me to defeat. And everything just took a long time, and I ended up still feeling like I didn't make a massive impact on the board whatsoever, and I probably could have just defended just as well if I didn't bother leaning into Change of Fortune at all. Now, as I discussed on the podcast with Nelson, you can just put Change of Fortune in a deck, not lean too much into it otherwise, and just be, happy when it triggers. That's completely fine, but overall, I don't like building into this with Nightcrawler too much. It can do fine. He's really good at triggering it, like I say, but having played it on several existing heroes, pre-Nightcrawler, I just think it's more fun and more impactful on them, even if they're not all as good at triggering it. Similar for Come Get Me Bub, fancy new card, gets a minion first, but he doesn't need the tough. It can kind of make, Bamf worth less on the villain, and Bamf is the big thing Nightcrawler has going for him, in my opinion. So it's fine, but take these new cards, put them elsewhere, in my opinion, or take Change of Fortune, but don't rely on it. Is kind of how I've been going. What I have really liked, of course, is Perfect Defense Nightcrawler. All those cards where if you defend and take no damage, you get a bonus. So things like Unflappable, hard to ignore. Haven't typically been running the events. I've been running stuff like Energy Barrier instead where I can, because if his hands are already quite unreliable, don't want to get a bunch of defense events which I might not need, or aren't going to let me impact the board even more. They're just going to help me defend more. But minions, so schemes, it's not going to help me. Multiplayer though, of course, you've got other people to help with that. You can lean more into it, and I do prefer, maybe some defense events there as well. So I quite like this. I think in solo, you need to prop it up with allies, just because you can, defend really well, but Nightcrawler doesn't have the cards to make a big impact. You're going to need to find some impact and reliability elsewhere. And as I kind of mentioned before, it's with allies. So I'm taking a lot of allies with Nightcrawler and protection, which is weird because you think, oh, you can defend, you don't need allies, and you don't need them to block, which is why I put Gambit and Cutlasses on the screen. These generally have good output. Gambit can get quite balanced stats. Maybe hold a good encounter card. Cutlasses, you just attack 3 times with him. You've got 9 damage. Nightcrawler really appreciates a 9 damage ally. Trust me on that one, especially like 1 and 2 player, really useful. And of course, if we're taking X-Men allies, which of course we're taking because they're really good and we have the X-Men trait, might as well take Utopia. It's strong, it's really good. Moving on to aggression, you would think that upgrade aggression was maybe really good for Nightcrawler because he's got that Bamf he can put out on enemies. But here's the thing, it's the same kind of thing as, the same problem as using Port and Punch to defeat a minion. You lose the Bamf. So I can put Bamf on a minion and I can use Take That and I can deal 7 damage and I'm almost certainly defeating it. But then Bamf is gone as well. So this is a free cost card for 7 damage. 4 effective resources is what I would say. If I played it from hand, it would be, Take That would go for my hand and then 3 other cards to pay for it. If Bamf is also gone, it kind of becomes a 4 cost card or, a 5 effective resource card. For 7 damage, it's about as good as Uppercut from the core set, a card that is basically abandoned outside of Hone Technique. And I guess you can Hone Technique Nightcrawler if you think you're going to need to deal 10 damage to minions very often. But he has 8 energy resources in his kit, barely any mentals. He is very much like Storm and Gambit, just tons of energy resources, whereas Hone Technique wants mentals. But leaning more into the upgrade on enemies thing, we have Surprise Move, but similar problem here. If you defeat a minion with it, Bamf is gone, it kind of inflates its cost. His starting attack of 1 isn't perfect for this. It's good when you've got the Cutlass out, and I should mention that Lock and Load for Nightcrawler is just amazing, really good. But overall, it's just not doing it for me. What I have seen in aggression is toe-to-toe, and I did have a little tinker with this myself, but it didn't quite do it for me either. So here's the thing. Choose an enemy, the enemy attacks you. With Bamf, you could probably defend that attack. You've got Retaliate because you're Cutlass. Great. So if you've got the Cutlass set up, you'll get that Retaliate, and you've got 4 defense. So yeah, you probably won't take much damage, especially, if you're on standard mode. So let's say the Bamf usage was just, an extra resource for this. Let's say you didn't get a bad boost effect or something that really messed you up. Okay, so I've spent 2 costs, 3 effective resources to get 6 damage, including the Retaliate here. Which could have popped to tough as well, so maybe it's a little bit better than that. But I've now lost a Bamf for the villain phase. So if I've got a spare Bamf and nothing better to combo with it, sure, not bad. But quite often you might only have 1 Bamf available and toe-to-toe. And I'd rather just leave Bamfs on the villain to block their attack in the villain phase. So this card really hasn't done it for me either. And I feel like by extension, I then need to talk about Taunt, go back to Protection. I think it's fine. But again, consuming Bamf, so you don't take too much damage from this, it kind of has a similar problem to toe-to-toe, almost like Change of Fortune as well. I said, you can set up to not get the downside from Taunt, but then the upside is worth less because you've invested resources into avoiding the downside. Still think it's not bad, but just using up a Bamf that could have been there for the villain phase. Again, it's just not consistent enough for me. In a couple of decks I've run for Nightcrawler, I've run 1 copy of Taunt just to try and accelerate setup and find some options. But I'm not a huge fan of this. I definitely wouldn't build into 3 of them personally. That has been my experience. So what do I like in aggression? Because I do like aggression for Nightcrawler, especially I think his solo is particularly quite good because he's got the defense, he's got that 2 forwarding he can use, and he doesn't have that great, damage cards. Well, we're back to the allies. Yeah, they're really good. Take some of the aggression ones if you like. Take whatever you like. But the kind of twist here in aggression is that we can slap attack training on them and get ridiculously good value. Now Cutlasses is hitting for 4, but you might be better off using this on some of the aggression allies, Shred on Gambit. It's just really, really good in that regard. So you get all the damage you were maybe missing here consistently because these allies are staying on the board for many turns, and enjoy defending, not being defeated. Hopefully you can find out threat removal. Use some of your allies, even if their attack is good if you have to. This works really, really well. It's a little bit slow to start because you have to find the ally, play the ally, maybe upgrade the ally to get, particularly good use, but it's fine, and I really quite like this. For Justice, I have kind of not gravitated toward the card for Justice, but the very cheap events which have, card draw or slightly just better value than average. These cards are generally considered maybe some of the more generic in Justice, but I think they're good cards. I love, I think these are always very enjoyable, but I have used them a lot for years. I don't think they have any special synergy of Nightcrawler as opposed to, just kind of covering for, what he needs. Cheap stuff that he can afford while, paying the Bamf tax, while, looking for this and that. And, the card draw from clear the area in one way or another is really useful. Kind of the combo here is one way or another, find a side scheme, defeat it with clear the area, maybe your basic 4 or whatever, then you can turn the tide. It's just a consistent little combo that's going to get you a lot of cards for cheap, a lot of effects for cheap, and it's good. It's good on everyone though, but it certainly helps Nightcrawler just by way of, efficiency and cost curve and so on. In bigger multiplayer, I actually do quite like multi-scheme forwarding Nightcrawler. Even the odds requires an energy. He's got tons of energies, as I just mentioned. Operative skill boosts up for the forwarding of an event. Even the odds hits multiple schemes. But Scout Ahead, his own forwarding event, can also hit multiple schemes. So boosting that up, it boosts both instances of the threat removal up. So rather than 1 additional threat removed for use of operative skill, it's 2. But of course, in solo play, or maybe if I want to take a different angle in multiplayer, I always come back to the allies again for Nightcrawler. He's got that protection baked into him, and what goes with protection? It's leadership. So it doesn't matter what aspect I'm playing him in, he's always going to be quite defensive, and he's always going to appreciate some consistency on the board in the form of allies. But take this to multiplayer, and we can slap on mission training. Maybe not onto Cutlasses. This is just, I'm continuing it's almost a meme at this point. But yeah, Nightcrawler defending to keep his allies alive so they don't have to chump block, so you can just do a bunch of stuff with them. It works really well. And since I've talked about allies for all the other aspects, you can bet I'm going to talk about them for leadership. And what am I taking in leadership? Well, I'm taking a lot of basic X-Men allies again, typically. But this time, again, there's a lot of leadership flavor we can add to this, but Uncanny X-Men, kind of an obvious one for all the X-Men. I talk about it every time I review an X-Men character. Unbelievable value. Make your allies cheaper, just what Nightcrawler wants after paying the Bamf tax, and it's just really good. Throw Beast in there, Pixie. Once we get Magneto's hero pack, throw Cyclops and, Phoenix in there. It's going to be really, really good. It already is really, really good for him. So, it's fine, but it's just something that all the X-Men can do, and although his defending does mean you can, play more allies without having to chump block, chump blocking is really efficient, so I don't feel there's a ton gained here. But Danger Room training, which is really fun on X-Men allies, I think is good because he doesn't have to block. He can really beef up his allies, keep them alive, get more output out of them with their stat increases. So I like this quite a lot, even if I don't think it's maybe as powerful as Uncanny X-Men, and that's a general statement across the game. And I like to take this further. So one of my favorite builds for Nightcrawler, maybe my favorite build, is kind of the Voltron build. And I use that word loosely. Maybe upgrade leadership would be more fitting. Just some good allies that can really stick around for a while or get benefits for having upgrades on them. Upgrade them and, just keep defending, and these allies will get a lot of work done. But there is a small elephant in the room, because I haven't really focused on basic yet, nor will I to a great extent. I have covered some basic cards here, I talked about Mutant Education at the start, but something I have found myself leaning more toward, just because I find that he just doesn't have enough money to get enough things done a lot of the time for me, is just powering all of us and a bunch of resource generators, and I think that really opens him up. The kind of downside here is this is something we've been able to do since Wave 2, since basically, Wasp brought us Paranormal of Us the first time, and, Quinn Carr's already in the game, and Helicarrier already was, and Avengers Mansion. You just use money to pay for, money printing machines, resource generators, and use the money you print from those machines to buy more machines that print money. It's kind of one of the least interesting things you can do, but it is very, very powerful. And again, it does help Nightcrawler. And these things are quite neutral, and they help enable the fun cards that you have around them. So it's fine. But I slightly dislike how dependent I feel on needing allies with Nightcrawler, and how dependent I feel on, having some kind of, deep resource investment. And I don't know if it's worth it, because at the end of the day, I still feel like I have to put in more effort to do less than most heroes. And the X-Men trait and things does prop him up quite a bit, but it's a little tricky. Now, he is strong enough. I feel like I have had a bit of a negative slant, a lot of this video. He's strong enough, but his weakness is basically, me having a hand of cards that leaves me frustrated, which I don't think is necessarily their design intention. That doesn't feel like a well-crafted in weakness. But maybe there's something I'm missing. I've played quite a few games at this point. I already dragged out doing this review, and that is kind of why I didn't want to do this review. So, into the conclusion, and what you see on the screen now are my predictions from when he was previewed. I thought his damage and forwarding would be kind of middling, survivability very high, but still up I thought it was going to be pretty quick. I don't know why I said that, because we hadn't seen any of his upgrades or anything. I have no idea what I was thinking. Reliability, though, I thought he was going to be really reliable, because he'd used the action to always get Bamf when he needed it. Unfortunately, it's worked out like this. This is what I think after playing him. Damage has gone down a notch. I just find all his damage options a little bit awkward. Forwarding has gone up a bit. I would say mainly in solo play, just because, you're always ready with that 2 fort stat. And his Scout Head is perfect for player side schemes, in solo play especially. Survivability has actually gone up. I did not know he was going to get a +1 to his defense when I predicted stuff. And getting that alongside Bamf has been really, really good. Economy, however, it's not looking good. And his card draw card, his Alter Ego support that gives him +1 recovery, again, he doesn't really need it. He could not have that card and he would basically play just the same. You might build slightly differently if you were trying to lean into it, but typically I don't think that's ever really something I'm inclined to do based on, trying it a few times. Death Focus and X-Gene, generally a massive boon for the X-Men characters, but only one of them can pay for a 1-cost card, and if that was the only event you had, or the only one that's relevant to the situation, the other ones are just, asleep and have no use. So I actually did not find his economy to be that good. And, this whole problem is kind of, amplified by the fact that if I want to keep getting Bamf consistently, I've got to pay to get it, and then I've got one less card to play with my other cards in hand. So definitely feels like a bit of a poor character in terms of money, which is again why I like the Paranoia of Us and a couple of resource generators to try and really get the ball rolling. Speed of setup was a weird one to rate. I could have put this at 3 stars. He's got a Cutlass, he's got his tail. You can play both of them, and he'll be very defensively sound. But board control, villain, progress, ability to win the game, it's just not going to be that. I feel like you really need to build an extra setup to him. But of course, then you're getting lower impact hands because it's more upgrades and things. So again, I'm just kind of going for essential, resource generators and things. Try and get impactful hands and just, again, economy, be able to play them. But you do need to set extra stuff up with him. It doesn't feel particularly fast to me. Reliability, I mean, I talked about it basically for this entire video. But getting the right card and the right amount of Bamfs at the right time with the right situation in front of you, card value I've kept at 3. I think he has some really good cards. Don't typically love them all in combination. Any character where I can get a hand full of hero cards and be a little bit disappointed, the value does take a hit there. Then we have fun factor, and I recently ranked all heroes for fun. And if you haven't seen that video, please check that out. I really enjoyed making that one, which is good because it was about fun. I sort of, I tentatively placed Nightcrawler, saying I didn't, have a definitive position, but this is where I'm thinking. I put him in my fun tier, which is actually, not that high up, because I really like a lot of characters in this game. It's probably why I make content for it, etc. But basically, I think he drops down to my second last tier, which is fun but flawed. There's a bunch of fun stuff with him, Bamf defending, and I do like some of his stuff, the Cutlasses. He has some fun stuff, but he just has a lot holding him back for me that leaves me feeling a little bit unsatisfied, honestly. So, it's fine. I think if you really like protection, defensive protection, you're going to enjoy Nightcrawler. If you like setting up an engine and taking the time to build up, and, you don't maybe play the high pressure scenarios on Expert too much, or mind playing the, mind avoiding them with him, you'll enjoy him a bit more. He has kind of reminded me of a mixture of Captain America, Colossus, and Quicksilver. Colossus is the big character I compared him to pre-release because Colossus spends tufts, but he could also use them to block attacks, whereas, Nightcrawler can spend Bamfs or use those to kind of help block attacks. And the final character that I would maybe compare him to is actually Valkyrie. And it's kind of the Deathglow problem to a small extent. It's kind of the problem I had a little bit with Iceman and even Rogue to some extent, even though I love Rogue. I don't think they have mastered the put an upgrade on the enemy kind of archetype hero. I think for Cyclops it works really well, but he just kind of, they're a bit more disposable. For the characters that revolve entirely around a specific one, it's just a little bit awkward. Some cards want you to have it in the right place. Some other effects might not trigger if you do that. And it just doesn't feel super great when most characters don't even have those problems and do just as well, if not better. Not kind of in the same league as Valkyrie, but you can kind of trace the problem. It might not feel a million miles away. But if you also really like Valkyrie, I think you're going to really like Nightcrawler as well. And there are big fans of Valkyrie out there. So, there is an audience, and maybe it's you, and maybe you really enjoy him. So let me know in the comments. Overall, though, I've got to rank him, and his survivability is so good. But the board control, everything just feels like a bit of hard work for me. Even with Iceman, I've had good results. Even with Jubilee, and I did give them decent rankings. They weren't on the top half of heroes for me, but they were, perfectly strong enough. Nightcrawler, in hindsight, after more testing, contrary to what I said in my, ranking all the heroes for fun video, for me, Nightcrawler falls a little bit under them overall, in all honesty. Now, if I was playing, protection in big 4-player games and just, measuring my success by how much I could defend, I think he's going to be really high up there. And I do think if you like that, again, he'll be a good choice. But for me, I got to put him down at 41st out of 54. Now, I should say there are like 13 other heroes I put below him. That's a significant chunk of the characters we have, like 20% plus, I think. So, he's fine. He's strong enough. But he definitely has some issues that I don't think come under, well-constructed, fun weaknesses to play around. More a little bit frustrating, a little bit awkward, that after many different decks and attempts, I just can't seem to, eradicate. I can certainly account for them. So that's about where I put him. And I think this is fine. I think if we keep getting heroes in, the top 30, 40% of power, it's just going to make the old heroes, not obsolete, but definitely just going to increase a gap between, maybe desirable power level. So I think falling here is fine. It's just the way he fell here was, I've said it a couple times now, just a little bit disappointing. But still, I think there's an audience for Nightcrawler out there. I know a lot of people do really like him, and that's awesome. So that's my review personally. Speaking of his hero pack in general, the protection cards, the Gambit ally, they're so good. I think just for that, he's absolutely worth it. I still think he is fun, just got a few flaws. And that about does it. If you have some thoughts on Nightcrawler to share, please let me know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.